Alrighty, so today we're going to install the panel. I'm going to show you how to do that, and I'm pretty much just going to be going directly from the documentation, but a lot of users had said it's easier to see someone do it, so I will show you. So the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you have a server set up, and we're just going to roll with Ubuntu 16. I've already got that all set up and updated, kernel's up to date. So the first thing I'm going to do is run mkdirp, and we're going to create this directory. Okay, so now we've created that directory, and what I'm going to do is move over into it. Okay, we can see this directory is empty. Excellent. So we've met those requirements, and now we need to install these dependencies. The easiest way to do that, instead of sitting here and typing all of these out, is to scroll down here to the bottom, and we see a huge list of dependencies that are already pre-typed for you. We are going to install this top one because Apache has been problematic recently. It's going to run through, might take a while, and while that's going on, we can move on to how to download. Finish installing our dependencies, and we need to download the panel itself. So to do that, I am going to maybe copy this command that is already nice and typed out for you. So what this is going to do is download it, and you'll notice we are already in our directory. Now we've got the file downloaded. You can see that by listing. It's right here. I'm going to go ahead and unpack that. Going to get a huge thing. And if we list our files, you'll notice them all. And we're going to go ahead and set some permissions. And then what we need to do is make sure, this is an important part, is make sure that all of the files are owned by the web server user. So once you run those two commands, you should notice that they are all now owned by this. You'll notice a couple that are still owned by root in this case. Not a big deal, because these are all empty files that we are not using to serve to users. So we have done that. Now we're going to move on to the fun part. First thing we need to do here for installing is to copy this command, which will install Composer, which gets all of our dependencies for us so that you don't have to sit there downloading multiple things. This might take a second, but it should. There we go. Now that we've done that, our next step is to run the setup configuration. So this will download all of our dependencies. It's going to warn you if you're running as root. In this case, we're going to. So now we've downloaded it, it has created us an application key. In this case, I'm letting you see it, but in general, don't let people see that. That's what we use to encrypt things. So what we're going to need to do now is run an environment configuration script. Now before I'm going to do that, I need to set up my database. So because I've just installed this, there's no password on the root account. So I'm already in, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the SQL database, and now we need to create a user. So I'm going to create user, I'm going to call this user panel, and I'm going to restrict them to localhost. If you are running an external server, you need to access this, you can change that to a %. Check Google. But in this case, we're going to run at localhost, identified by, and then we're going to insert our password in single quotes. Now, because this is a local interface and other people are not going to be able to access it, and for the sake of the tutorial, we're just going to use panel as the password. Don't do that in the real world. So, we've created that user. Now we need to grant them permissions. So to do that, we are going to run a grant command. Grant all privileges on. And then, so this user, I'm going to create panel. Then we're going to go and put in panel at localhost, same as above. Now we need to create the database. So we are going to create database, and you'll notice above grant privileges on panel. So that means our database is called panel, and we are assigning it to all tables inside that database. So I'm going to create database panel. It's okay if these say 0 rows affected. So now we are going to flush privileges, and then we can exit. So we've created our user. We can test this by running the same command we used above, except using panel instead of root. And then if we enter panel, we have access. I'm going to exit because I don't need to do that anymore. So now we're going to set up an environment. Just copy this command right here. Make sure you're in the panel directory, otherwise it will not work. Okay, so our host is localhost, so we're just going to hit enter, same port. We have changed our database name, however, so I'm going to enter panel. That's what we named our database above. Our username is also panel in this case, and our password, panel. You can see how this is unsafe. Now, in this spot, you'll want to enter the URL to access your panel. So in this case, I'm not using a domain name, I'm just using an IP, so I'm going to enter that. If you're using a domain, enter that there. This can always be changed later, but in this case, we're just going to make it easier for ourselves. So we've done that, and you can set a time zone, and you'll notice it kind of auto-selects. So it's already selected America, New York. I'll hit Tab, do that. It's going to write our environment. So our environment's done. Now we're going to set up our mail server. You'll notice a couple options. Suggest postmark, mandrill, or mailgun. In this case, I'm just going to default to the PHP mail server. It's most likely not going to work though, but for the sake of this tutorial, I do not need it to. So, and I'm going to set it to send from that email address. So it's written everything it needs. And now we're going to set up our database. The great thing is we've already created an empty database, and this panel is smart enough to create everything it needs for us. So if we just run this migrate command, it's going to ask yes or no because it's a production environment. We're going to tell it yes. It's going to create the table, and then it's going to migrate all of those. So that's created all our tables, set everything up. Now we're going to insert some services using our database seeder. It's going to ask the same things, and then we just tell it yes, and it'll install all of these services for us. The final thing we need to do is to set up our user. So this is going to be our admin user. Yes. Now you'll notice it just gave me that invalid password format. That's because I used a password that does not have an uppercase, lowercase, and a number in it. So I'm going to redo this command and... Alright, so now we've created our root administrator account. We entered yes up here. If you enter no, you probably won't be able to log in. So we're getting there. Now what we need to do is enter our queue listeners. So that's a really easy thing because we've installed this into the default directory. So all we have to do is open up our cron tab with cron tab -E and just select nano. So scroll to the bottom and we're just going to paste this in and save. Alright, so now we'll make sure it's started. It should be running already, but it never hurts. Now we need to install Supervisor. Supervisor is going to help us run some background tasks, especially sending commands to your server and sending emails. If you don't run this service, you will not be able to get emails. So we're going to make sure Supervisor starts, we have, and then we are going to create a file in this directory. So I'm just going to do that, and since it's Pterodactyl worker, so we've created it. Same thing here, we just copy and paste. Okay. Now if you have multiple things and you want to run multiple processes, you can, but we're not going to worry about that. 2 is probably plenty. So now what we need to do is tell Supervisor to reread and update its configurations. If you hit an error, it's probably not running, but it should be if you follow the documentation. And then we're going to tell it to start that worker for us. And now when the server boots in the future, it should auto start that. So we've got all of that, and our last step is to set up the web server. So we're using Nginx, and so all we need to do is create a new file inside sites available. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to call it pterodactyl.conf. So, ta-da! Now, I'm going to copy this whole block because it's got everything we need, and there's only one line that we need to edit, which is the server name up here. So, because I'm using an IP, I'm going to enter that in place of a domain name. If you're using a domain name, enter that. Don't include the HTTP or anything else. So now I'm going to save that file, and I'm going to symlink it to the sites enabled folder. So now we've enabled it, and if we go look inside, you see that we have a default and we have our newly created file. That's what we want. We're going to go ahead and rm this file. So You'll notice there was a little bit of a mistake right there, but it's okay. We removed it from available. You really only need to remove it from sites enabled, but if you do remove it from sites available, make sure to remove it from sites enabled. So we've done all of that, and now we're just going to restart, and we are good to go. So we can check this out. We should be able to, and so we can log in. I don't really care to save that password on this. So now we're in the admin control panel.